Hi there. Welcome back to the weird side of YouTube. I'm your host, author Disa Knipe, and this is The Reading Storm, the show where I talk about different book genres that I read, like or dislike, and I also do Let's Reads. And today I thought I'd start a series of one-shot Let's Reads instead of like series. So we have a lot of episodes in mind right now that are going to premiere over the next month. So first I wanted to start it off, because I'm narcissistic garbage, with my novel. I'm only going to read the prologue, because I was looking through my videos last night, and I realized I never did a live reading of my novel, which I know I was planning on doing even a year before my mental breakdown, where I took a break for a year and a half from YouTube. I was on YouTube for like a year promoting this, and I never did a reading of it, which is very strange. So I thought we would get started today with this Let's Read one-shot series by reading the prologue of Dream. Let's get started. Dream, a surreal and psychedelic gay romance/fantasy novel. Not a fan of the title anymore. Prologue, Toy Box. When I was growing up, I had this strange obsession with the 6th step on the staircase in my childhood home. There was just something so comforting about it being in the very middle of 12 perfectly even steps. Every single time my mother or father would lead me up or down, I'd stop and sit on the 6th step and linger there in wonder and amazement, filling the air around us with giggles of innocent glee. I also remember my mother becoming increasingly worried over this. In fact, both of my parents thought that it was strange and a bit obsessive that I showed the exact same behavior each and every time we ascended or descended those stairs, especially because it was lasting into my school days. They just didn't understand that it was something that simply gave me comfort as a child, and I couldn't explain it with my budding vocabulary. Since then, my whole life has been a perpetual state of existing in the in-between. Like a living contradiction, I am black and I am white, but I have not a single streak of gray. I'm a living, breathing combination of the rebelliousness of rock and roll and the poetic rhythm of hip-hop, and I perfectly straddle the line between masculine and feminine. Since I was very small, I have been lost somewhere between fantasy and reality. Now that I am technically an adult, I feel more like a helpless child than I did within my youth, and within these countless states of living betwixt and between, I've always felt pressured into choosing sides, but that is something I just don't know how to do. This story begins on the day that I turned 18. My father forgot my birthday for the 3rd time in a row. Instead of letting him spend the day with me, my evil stepmother made him take her shopping, despite the fact that he was already in debt. Penumbra was a vile and hideous woman on the inside, but her physical beauty had always been quite the subject for all the men in town. My real mom at least had the decency to call me and wish me a happy birthday. She told me that she had sent me a present in the mail and that it was scheduled to arrive on that particular day. While this did excite me, I was happier about the fact that someone actually cared about me and my 18th birthday. Not that it was a surprise. Despite the distance between us, Mama had always been my best friend. My only friend, actually, ever since the divorce. Of course, she asked about how school went that day. I usually lied to her about such things just to keep her from worrying too much. That day was no different. High school in a small southern town was a personal hell for me, a slightly effeminate, nerdy boy of mixed race. Being of color and having a white guardian resulted in a lot of confusion from my peers. It was different from everyone. I was different from everyone, and there just didn't seem to be a place for me. By 18, I was more than used to my classmates' incredibly rude and demeaning questions, however. Deciding not to mention the violent fight I had gotten into, or the resulting suspension, I told my mother that I had a good day. I even let myself brag a bit about how exceptionally well I was doing in all my classes. She told me that she was proud of me, but her voice had grown heavy and dark with concern. Even though she never pressed me for more information, I could tell that she somehow always sensed when I was lying to her. When you get your license, maybe you can borrow your father's truck to come visit me, she continued. I miss you terribly. My heart sank. I just turned 18 and I still didn't know the first thing about driving. Penumbra, my father's new wife, suddenly wouldn't allow him to teach me. She always said that it wasn't their responsibility to ensure that I learned such things. If there had been a driving class in school, I surely would have taken it, eagerly, but there simply wasn't. I had no friends to teach me either, so my only option was to wait for my father and stepmother to change their minds and be kind for once. I found myself lying to my mother for the second time in one conversation. I hadn't seen her in 8 years, and after Penumbra burned all my old family photographs, it seemed as though I was almost forgetting what my beloved mother even looked like. I missed her terribly, but with each passing year, the thought of reuniting with her seemed more and more impossible. With her meager paycheck, she just couldn't afford to fly out to see me or make the 2-day trip by car, but I was grateful to her for calling me so often, and even more thankful to Penumbra for letting them happen. After I laid the phone to rest back in its cradle, I left my closet-like bedroom within our tiny, cramped apartment, wondering what I was supposed to do. Heading into the bathroom, I realized how much I already hated being an 18-year-old. It was nothing short of terrifying to stop at this precipice and stare into the deep, endless, unknown future before me. With the help of their loving parents, my peers had already learned how to fly, yet it seemed that I could not even run yet. For nearly a whole decade, my wonderful stepmother had been threatening to kick me out as soon as I reached this dreaded age. I had hoped that Dad would have grown a backbone by then, telling her that I was to stay until I was ready and vowing to become an actual father, starting by teaching me how to drive and helping me enroll into college. Alas, he was still under her wicked spell just as much as he was the day that she snatched him away from my overly trusting mother. I wanted so desperately to escape, but I had no idea how I would even begin such a daunting task. Beyond having no tuition money, the very idea of going away to college was simply crippling. Some simple things such as job interviews seemed completely impossible to someone that spent almost all of his young life locked away in a room with household pests as his only form of social interaction. I suppose I was a bit of a male Rapunzel, but instead of the fabulous golden hair, I had endless flowing anxiety that constantly entangled me within my own self-doubt, and it seemed as though there was no happily ever after lined up for me. You see, behind all this, I had a deep, dark secret that even I could not admit to myself. It was ever present, like an ominous storm cloud, billowing and jolting with bursts of the brightest lightning, following me throughout my nightmarish life, threatening to erupt above my head at any given moment with its acid rain of truth. And what I was afraid of more than anything was Penumbra's reaction to learning of that thorn in my side. Behind closed doors, she had always been very judgmental of people who were different from her. It seemed that other than shopping, her favorite pastime was spending hours upon hours ranting and shrieking about how much she hated certain people, and yes, I was one of them. Without a doubt, she would turn my secret into even more ammunition to hurt me with, and I had enough pain already. I gazed into my reflection in the bathroom mirror and was suddenly reminded of the fight I had gotten into at school earlier. My eye was still blackened. It lingered there behind my glasses, taunting me, reminding me of what a coward I was. The memory of the event made me sick to my stomach. A bully at school had called me a faggot for the 1000th time that week. Each time he reiterated this word, a sickly darkness grew in my heart like a cancer, eating away at my very soul. I suppose my emotions had begun to boil over that day, as all I knew as I heard him vomit that vile word was a fiery, thoughtless wrath. I found myself punching him in the jaw, almost in slow motion. As my tightly balled fist crashed into his face, instant regret washed over me, however. Violence was never something I condoned. He and 3 of his friends beat me to a bloody pulp as punishment. I got suspended for throwing the first punch. The 4 boys that taunted me for a week straight and ganged up on me faced no consequences whatsoever. And this was normal at my high school. I had begun to accept it. I was supposed to get my write-up slip signed by my dad. The she-devil ripped it from his grasp and read it, ignoring my begging and pleading for her to stop. When she finally realized why I was in trouble, she shot a bitter glare toward me. There was pure hatred shining within her eyes. Instead of getting mad when someone calls you a faggot, why don't you just, not act like a faggot? With that, she tossed the slip into the air and strutted toward the front door, eager to spend all my father's money. Without a word, my father looked me up and down in complete disappointment before chasing after her like a neutered dog. As the door closed behind them, I knelt down to the floor, staring at the write-up slip in silence as my eyes filled with tears. I was going to have to forge my father's signature, yet again. A committed Southern Baptist, Penumbra made us go to church each Sunday and Wednesday. Every single member of the surprisingly large congregation thought that my family was absolutely perfect and aspired to be just like us. At least they aspired to become what they thought we were. The beautiful lie that my manipulating stepmother worked ever so hard for them to see. She made herself out to be a caricature of a doting 1950s housewife and mother, whose happiness completely and only depended on the love and approval of her husband and stepson, and everyone in that town absolutely adored her for it. My father didn't seem to care about any of this. He constantly took her side, even when she was clearly in the wrong. It was almost as if she had him under some sort of spell, making him deaf to the insults and blind to the beatings that she dealt to me on an almost daily basis. I remember when I was a child, my mother would sing 60s and 70s rock and roll music while my father strummed along on his acoustic guitar. There might be a bit of bias here, but I honestly believe that they were amazing at it. Since the divorce, I hadn't even seen the guitar, and my stepmother absolutely loathed any and all music that wasn't gospel. Even the guidance counselors at school were under the impression that Penumbra was the perfect mother. They were somehow convinced that the bruises and cigarette burns were all self-inflicted, which was why I had to speak to a psychiatrist twice a week. My stepmother had set up this little game in such a way that I had no choice but to lose. With her spider silk as the puppet's strings, this Black Widow was nigh undefeatable, and I was trapped within the heart of her web. For years, all I wanted to do was run away, but I had no idea how to take care of myself. It seemed as though I was doomed to decide between two worlds, one being the hell that I had been in for nearly a decade, which molded my mind in such a way that I almost found comfort in the abuse, simply because it was familiar, and the other the complete and total unknown. And despite how much I craved escape, the addiction that I had developed to my own suffering had grown too powerful. I couldn't just walk away. My father and stepmother were all I had. I needed some sort of lodestar, a guiding light to lead me down the right path. Having been lost within the sickly yellowed walls and permanent cigarette stench of that dreadfully stifled apartment, I had begun to lose all hope. My only comfort were my sweet memories from childhood. Searching for an answer in my reflection through the bathroom mirror, I saw that my dark brown eyes were tired, listless, and retreating into my skull. The facial hair that I had let grow in during my senior year had finally formed a mustache and a goatee, although they weren't connected yet. My thick curly black hair was messy and in need of combing, but shaved at the sides and came to a point in the back, a style that I had learned to create on my own since my guardians hadn't treated me to a haircut in years. I was growing thin, and my usually glowing skin had clearly grayed. My penumbra was slowly killing me. Of this I was convinced. Dressed in a red t-shirt and an old pair of blue jeans, I looked about the same as I did every other day. Around my neck was a string with a black claw hanging from it. I couldn't remember its origins, or the animal that it had come from, or how I had even come to acquire it, but none of that really mattered to me. It was the only thing from my childhood that I had left, and despite Penumbra's many fierce attempts, I had somehow kept it safe from her fiery destruction. I took off my black-rimmed glasses, folded them up, and laid them next to the sink. After quickly undressing, I hopped into the shower. My attempts at scrubbing the adulthood off me proved to be of no avail. I wanted nothing more than to retreat back to my childhood. In my mind's eye, I could actually see myself playing with my favorite toys while my mom and dad watched from the doorway, smiling and holding each other. For a few weeks prior to this moment, my life had been consumed by countless panic attacks. I had been dreading my birthday as if I knew I were going to die on it. Now that it was here, I felt sicker and sicker with every passing second. I just wanted to hide away from the world until the age of my heart caught up to that of my body, but in truth, I didn't want it to. When I was finished bathing, I decided to go outside and check the mail for my mother's gift, hoping that it could lift my spirits a bit. After I placed my glasses back over my eyes, the phone began to ring. Once I wrapped a towel around my waist, I walked out into the hallway in silence. Still dripping in the streaming water, I retrieved the phone from its cradle to hear a hideously familiar voice. It was her, the dreaded she-devil. "Hello, Penumbra." My voice was almost as monotone as my life. "Oh, Dante, call me Mom, dear." She sighed. "I wanted to wish you a happy birthday. She usually reserved this soft, sweet voice to decorate the pretty little lies that she told my teachers and the people at church. Really? My heart skipped a beat. It seemed as though the 1,000 wishes I spent on all those shooting stars and birthday candles were finally coming true. I was going to have a family. Yes, of course, Penumbra exclaimed. Her voice was suddenly its normal, obnoxious screech again. Since your father and I are at the mall already, would you like me to pick you up a dress too? We can match. And just like that, my hopes were shattered. As she cackled loudly into my ear, I let out a sigh of defeat and tried to calm myself down. Thanks, Penumbra, I managed through a weak, cracking voice, but I think I'll pass. Well, you're 18 now, so get the hell out of my house, she screamed, piercing my eardrum with her shrill din of a voice. It was like talking to a tornado siren. This is an apartment and it belongs to my father, I retorted, gathering a bit of courage. And your father belongs to me, so get the hell out before I call the police. I rolled my eyes and hung up the phone. Shaking my head, I found myself wondering why she had always treated me in such a hateful way. After living with her for almost a decade, I knew surprisingly very little about her, but in all honesty, part of me felt as though that was a good thing. Penumbra spent most of her time at the town's only shopping mall, forcing my father to buy her expensive clothes and gaudy jewelry that he really couldn't afford. Because of this, I had gone without new clothes and school supplies for years. Despite that pesky fact, she still blamed me when we couldn't make rent at the end of the month. I wanted so desperately to move back in with my mom, and now that I was 18, I legally had that option, but I knew that if I chose this path, it would have just made it harder for her to make ends meet. That was one more burden that I didn't want to put on her shoulders. With Penumbra threatening to kick me out of the house, however, it was looking like moving into my mother's tiny one-bedroom house was my only option. This house is more of a shack or a cabin in the woods. I was shocked to learn that it actually had running water and electricity. It was quaint, and much less than my mother deserved, but it was all that she could afford after the divorce. She didn't take a penny from my father, even though she could have ripped everything away from him. It just wasn't worth the hassle, she said. After I got dressed again, I walked outside of the apartment and into the warm light of day. The sunlight did little to calm my mind, which was reeling with hypothetical situations once again. What I missed even more than my mother was seeing my parents together. We were all happy then. It made sense, and everything fit together like a beautiful jigsaw puzzle. Besides the treasured memories I had of my parents, I actually couldn't remember all that much about my childhood. The only other ones that still resonated within me were the memories I had about certain toys that I had always played with. With my being such a shy boy, these toys were my very best friends. I could still picture them perfectly within my mind's eye. One was a furry brown teddy bear that I had named Theodore Stuffingsworth. He protected me from the dark, which I had always been deathly afraid of. With it being my favorite toy, I remembered taking him everywhere that I went. I got made fun of in elementary school for carrying him around all the time, but I didn't care. I truly loved that bear. Another one of my beloved toys was a pretty Japanese mermaid doll that I had named Mizu Murakami. With a shimmering koi fish tail and an orange starfish covering her chest, she came with a large plastic pearl that she would use as a crystal ball. Through it, she would receive psychic visions. That was the storyline I invented in my head anyway. Theodore, Mizu, and I would have tea parties regularly, using an antique porcelain tea set, a gift from my grandmother. The most beautiful hot pink roses were painted on all the cups. I remember actually drinking hot tea out of them and having plates of cakes that I would share with my silent friends. I also had a remote-controlled motorcycle, a toy dragon, and 4 unique playsets, each with action figures of their own. These consisted of a pirate ship with a captain action figure, a spacecraft with a gray alien doll, a haunted mansion with a vampire figure, an ancient Egyptian palace and pyramid with a mummy figure, and an enchanted forest with a flying fairy doll. With these simple toys, I went on countless grand adventures within the realms of my own endless imagination, and I was the happiest that I had ever been. My mother and I would also put jigsaw puzzles together every day after I came home from elementary school. That was one of my favorite memories of her, and possibly what I missed the most. When we finished one, she would glue the pieces together, frame the completed image, and hang it on the wall next to the staircase among our family portraits. It wasn't long before we had our own little art gallery. Just as I walked outside of the apartment complex, my foot collided with a large wooden box that looked an awful lot like a treasure chest. It had been inexplicably set in front of the door. A wide yellow envelope had been taped atop it. Scrawled across this letter was a bright and cheery birthday message written in my mother's handwriting. Becoming curious, I lifted the treasure box into my toned, slender arms. It was then that I saw a black cat staring at me from the end of the parking lot before me. She stood still upon the grass next to a large tree and just before the small patch of woods that separated the campus from the highway. Her glowing yellow eyes were piercing and mysterious. As she slowly tilted her head, her tail danced wildly behind her in agitation. Shrugging my shoulders, I dismissed the mysterious feline and walked back inside of the apartment. Setting the massive box onto the kitchen table, I began to wonder what was inside. For years, all my mother could afford to send me were birthday cards. This was a birthday surprise indeed, and I was incredibly excited. Taking the happy-colored envelope into my hands, I began to slowly peel it open. Inside was a birthday card with a beautiful sunny sky on its cover. Opening it, I began to read the message that my mother had sent me, allowing a bright smile to spread across my face. Hey buddy, I miss you. I know I don't have much money, but since it's your 18th birthday, I wanted to try and make it special. Hopefully you remember some of these ancient relics. I love you, Mama. Excited to see what she was referring to, I laid the birthday card onto the kitchen table beside the gigantic treasure box. I then lifted up the lid of the chest, revealing that it had been filled with 1,000 crumpled newspapers. Growing more curious, I plunged my hands inside, eager to find what treasures awaited within its depths. Finally, my fingertips brushed against something warm and fuzzy. Confused by this, I wrapped my hands around the strange furry item and pulled it from the crumpled balls of gray newspaper. My eyes lit up as Theodore, my childhood teddy bear, was revealed to me. His left button eye was only hanging on by a loose thread, and his fur had become quite scruffy. Despite this, I lost my breath, and my broken heart leaped out of my chest upon recognizing him. I held him close and squeezed him tightly, growing more excited by the second. I set him down next to the wooden box on the table and continued going through the crumpled newspapers. Soon I discovered Mizu, the motorcycle and its controller, the dragon, the complete tea set, and all my playsets. Although they were a bit dusty, they were all complete and perfect. I felt like I had stepped into a time machine. Beyond these things was a square cardboard box with a beautiful starry sky painted on the front. Across the top of this box were the words "Puzzle of Memories." Intrigued, I opened it. Inside I found a number of jigsaw puzzle pieces that made up the image of the night sky that was shown on the box. With a wide grin, I set the puzzle aside and continued searching the time capsule that my mother had sent me through the mail. Beneath more of the crumpled newspapers, I discovered a witch's castle playset, complete with a green-skinned wicked witch doll. Wearing a black dress and a pointed hat, she had a long, sharp nose and bright red-orange hair. Her glare was menacing, her smirk taunting. There was something about her brightly painted yellow eyes that was incredibly disturbing to me. I didn't remember her or her accompanying playset at all. This didn't surprise me, however, due to the fact that most of my childhood memories had either warped or faded altogether. I was surprised that there weren't more mystery toys in that box. The last thing I discovered was a small photo album. With a wide grin, I took it from within the chest and began to flip through it. It was filled with photographs of me and my parents back when they were madly in love. In almost all these pictures, I had my teddy bear with me. Some of them also featured my mermaid doll. I gathered all my gifts into my arms and brought them into my gray and empty bedroom, illuminating it with a bit of the color and light of my childhood. In silence, I set Theodore down onto my freshly made bed. With him standing guard like he did all those years before, I began setting up all the playsets in the corner of the room. Once that was finished, I placed Mizu right next to the pirate ship, as if she were swimming in invisible waters. The tea set was then placed on the floor beside her. The treasure chest itself I had placed in my rather empty closet. It took up most of the space beneath the sparse and ill-fitting clothes that hung from the bar. It was then that my mind returned to the puzzle of memories. Retrieving its box, I sat in the middle of my bedroom floor and dumped out the countless pieces in front of me. It was only then that I realized that most of them were missing. I quickly arranged the ones I had, forming only the rectangular frame of the beautiful starry sky that was shown on the box. Standing up, I gazed down at it and smiled. Despite its many missing pieces, it was lovely. In that cool, calm moment, I was actually happy. Like a thin platform of glass, it was a fragile glee, however, and in the back of my mind, I somehow knew that it would soon shatter from beneath me. At that time, I thought this fear was of Penumbra's destructive ways, as I knew that if she came home and found my old toys, she would immediately break them all in front of me, as she had done to countless other possessions of mine. That wasn't quite the case, however. I turned back to Theodore as he sat in silence between my thin, uncomfortable pillows. Recalling how dependable he was during my youth, I smiled like the jovial child that I once was. He had always protected me from the darkness and comforted me when I was lonely. It was in that moment that I found myself longing for a living being that possessed those qualities. Taking a breath, I gazed out of the window and into the setting sun of the afternoon. Although I did not have a birthday cake with 18 candles to blow out, I closed my eyes and silently made one final wish. I asked for a real friend, one that was reliable, loyal, and loving, just like Theodore had always been. If I couldn't have my family back, I was definitely going to need a close friend to accompany me on this scary, new journey into adulthood. Dontavius Conrad Jackson, Penumbra's voice shattered the silence, sounding as if it were coming from outside my window. I know your mother sent you a birthday present. Where is it? I could already hear my father scrambling to unlock the door with his keys. A dark anxiety appeared within me, for I knew that if my stepmother found my childhood toys, she would burn them, destroy them, or otherwise get rid of them, just like she did everything else we had of my mom. In fright, I rushed to throw all my old treasures back into the chest in my closet. After recklessly tossing the playsets and their figures inside, I did the same with the puzzle pieces and the photo album. Finally, I took Theodore and Mizu into my arms and crept into the closet myself. As I pulled the door closed behind me, I could hear the infernal clacking of Penumbra's heels as she stomped toward my bedroom, drawing closer with every passing second. "Dante!" she shouted, violently beating on my bedroom door. "I am going to beat the shit out of you if you... just for ignoring me." With a gulp, she turned to the gigantic treasure chest below me. I turned to the gigantic treasure chest below me. Fearing for my life, I clutched my favorite toys to my chest and silently crawled inside. Just as my wicked stepmother threw open my bedroom door, I closed the lid of the old wooden toy box as I lay in the fetal position inside. Sorry. Squeezing my eyes shut as the darkness surrounded me, I began to pray to anyone who would listen, growing more desperate with each passing second. Suddenly, the walls of the chest disappeared, and I was surrounded by violent flashes of multiple interweaving colors as I floated through the air. It was as if I were looking through a kaleidoscope. Perhaps the strangest part was that an eerie, instrumental, electronic medley of nursery rhymes began to assault my ears with its din. To the rhythm of this fast, terrifying music, the colors began to take the shapes of strangely warped faces, which caused me to drop Mizu and Theodore in terror. Some of them were people I immediately recognized, such as my parents. Others were complete strangers. Each of them was laughing, which only served to frighten me even more. It looked and felt as if I were falling through an endless chasm at blinding speeds. I flew past the terrifying cackling faces and darted deeper into the flashing colors that surrounded me. The eerie music grew louder and faster the farther I descended. Ethereal and glowing jigsaw pieces began to fly past me. Instead of still images, however, they held moving ones that played like short films. I saw people talking and scenes of nature within them, none of which I recognized. The roar of a massive animal exploded from behind me. Within a few moments, a gigantic black dragon, one that looked exactly like my childhood toy, flew past me, heading deeper into the vortex that I was falling into. As it opened its abyss of a mouth, it spit fire through the air, spraying it throughout the open atmosphere. Its mammoth wings flapped with unbridled strength, sending me spiraling out of control as it vanished into the bright neon colors that continued to mesh together and change before me. It was then that giant letter blocks, the kind that toddlers play with in order to learn how to count and spell, appeared within the air. They all floated about eerily, forming 3 intentional words for me to read as I flew through time and space. "Welcome to Halcyon," I read aloud, confused by the message. That same black cat from the edge of the driveway appeared on top of the letter W. She began to hop across the blocks of the first word, flashing curious, glowing glances toward me. It seemed as though she was confused and a bit concerned by my presence. When she made it to the E block, she immediately leaped off of it and vanished into the ether. Suddenly, The letter blocks all exploded into 1,000 pieces of candy. They rained down all around me as I struggled to make sense of it all. Taking one into my grasp, I gazed down at it as I continued to fall through the brightly colored vortex. The beautifully wrapped sweet flew through my grasp at once as my surroundings began to change yet again. A massive black pirate ship appeared as if from nowhere and sailed through the air, slowly passing me by. It was immediately followed by a gigantic flying saucer, which began to shoot bright, lightning-fast lasers at the quickly departing vessel. They both vanished into the darkness behind me as I turned back to face forward. Mysterious silhouettes began to appear as I passed them at gut-wrenching velocity. The gigantic green face of the witch doll materialized before me, her glowing yellow eyes piercing into my very soul. As I flew toward her, she began to cackle, filling my ears with her shrieking voice. Still unable to control my trajectory, I flew right inside of her gigantic gaping mouth, as if she were swallowing me whole. Everything faded to black, and the strange music stopped at once, and suddenly, it was the silence that frightened me. That was the prologue of my novel, Dream, a surreal and psychedelic gay romance novel. It gets a lot weirder, more Alice in Wonderland-esque, and gayer. It's about trauma and overcoming childhood trauma. It's pretty much young adult. You know Theodore, my teddy bear that I have on the channel, he's from this book, although in the book, technically, he's not really a teddy bear, he's a person. The main character just remembers him as a teddy bear. Spoiler alert, but it's been like 3 years since I published this book, so you should have read it by now. But, I was really excited to finally read the prologue for you guys, and hopefully you guys liked it. If you did, please like and subscribe. The link for the paperback copy for Amazon and Barnes & Noble is in the description. Also, I do plan on having signed copies of this on my Etsy store later this year when I finally am able to reopen it. But you can find me on all social media at author DC Knipe, and I love you guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!